Iron Men in wooden ships. A description of heroism never more apt as when applied to those who braved the Arctic. Up to the early part of the 20th century, the single largest focus of Arctic exploration was the Northwest Passage. For over 300 years, European explorers conceived the passage to be a route to the rich markets of the Orient. By 1800, it was realized that the passage was too treacherous to serve as an economic east-west thoroughfare. But Britain pressed onward, moving ever deeper into unknown territory. By the 1840s, the push to complete the charting of the Northwest Passage had become a national obsession, as powerful as that of a century later, when the world would turn its adventure-starved eyes to the moon. Here on Beechey Island, at the upper reaches of the passage, are the graves of 3 ordinary sailors, doomed by extraordinary circumstances. Buried deep within the permafrost, their coffins are time capsules, waiting to give up their secrets of another age. To modern-day scientific explorers, these time capsules are a window into the lives and deaths of men who challenged the Arctic, and to a compelling mystery, forever frozen in time. In May of 1845, the British Admiralty commissioned the 58th and hopefully final charting of the Northwest Passage. The naval ships HMS Erebus and Terror were equipped with bows of reinforced iron, powered with converted locomotive engines, and crewed by 129 men. Sir John Franklin was, at 59, a veteran of 2 overland expeditions in the North American Arctic. Franklin captained HMS Erebus and commanded the entire expedition. James Fitzjames served as the Erebus' second-in-command. Francis Crozier was captain of the Erebus' sister ship, HMS Terror. The Franklin expedition was last seen 2 months after departure, moving into Lancaster Sound. According to a recovered document, the Erebus and Terror entered the Arctic archipelago through Lancaster Sound, circumnavigated Cornwallis Island, and wintered off Beechey Island. In early summer of 1846, Franklin steered his ships in a southwesterly direction toward King William Island. Since his maps indicated that King William was a peninsula attached on the eastern side, Franklin stayed to the west. By September of 1846, the 2 vessels were hopelessly entrapped in pack ice 15 miles from King William Island. There was to be no spring thaw that year, nor the next. In June of 1847, at the age of 61, Sir John Franklin died. By the 22nd of April, 1848, 8 other officers and 15 crewmen were dead. 105 desperate survivors fled the ships, dragging a lifeboat laden with prayer books, cutlery, curtain rods, plates, even a writing desk. The sailors trekked down the coast of King William Island, hoping to make their escape to a Hudson's Bay post 1,000 miles to the south. The death march lasted from spring to winter. In their last extremities, some fed on the bodies of dead comrades. Unwittingly, the last of the Franklin crew did succeed in traversing the final stretch of the Northwest Passage. Their legacy, a pathetic trail of bones that ended on Adelaide Peninsula on the south coast of Simpson Strait, known today as Starvation Cove. Why did 24 men die before the ships were deserted? And why would the survivors drag heavy, useless cargo on a southward 1,000-mile trek when they knew that well-stocked whaling ships frequented the north end of the passage? Dr. Owen Beatty is well known in Canada for his work in forensic anthropology. His fascination with the Franklin mystery has resulted in several trips to the high Arctic, beginning with a 1981 trip to King William Island to collect bone samples.
This place is often referred to as Crozier's Landing, and what this represents is the point on King William Island where the 105 surviving Franklin crewmen congregated after abandoning the ships, which were located 5 leagues northwest of here in late April of 1848. And what we have behind me here is their campsite. It's made up of around 13 tent circles, and if you walk around this site today, you can find scattered over the site a lot of artifacts from that time period, 1848. Very little is left, but you can see throughout the structure, you can see bone, metal, and wood.
All the forlorn remnants were interesting to Dr. Beatty, but to apply his specialty, he required human bone. Beatty brought a variety of skeletal samples back to his lab in Edmonton and began a series of forensic examinations into their biological, physical, and chemical composition.
The biological information we're looking for is evidence of health, disease, and other evidence for bone alterations. But there's another perspective to look at in bone material like this, and that's what makes up the bone. And we submitted small bone fragments for trace element analysis. And the results initially were very interesting to me, but I didn't pick up on perhaps the possible significance. And the results related to, among other elements that are present in the bone, and is the presence of lead. And in the one Franklin individual, the lead levels were in the order of 220 to 230 parts per million. And in comparison, the Inuit materials from, remember, the same time period are about 1/10 the amount. And the thoughts were multiple here. Was this something that reflected the lead exposures of this one individual, or could it have been a more expansive problem that may have been shared by some of the other expedition members?
Dr. Beatty's suspicion that lead poisoning may have contributed to the demise of the Franklin expedition sprang from a knowledge of what lead can do to the body and mind. Paralysis of the muscles, excruciating pain in the limbs, anorexia, colic, neuroses, disorientation, inflammation of the nerves or brain. Was it possible that madness and the inability to judge time and space could have made 1,000 miles seem a short distance, or turned ornate, inedible objects into reasonable cargo for a desperate journey? It had long been known that there were 3 graves on Beechey Island. In 1984, Dr. Beatty and his scientific team traveled to Beechey to investigate one of the graves, that of Petty Officer John Torrington of HMS Terror. The findings were staggering. John Torrington's body was almost perfectly preserved. The samples taken revealed that the body's lead levels, though not as high as that in the bones of the King William sailor, were still 5 times higher than the Inuit bones from the same time period. Could it be that the lead intake continued over the course of the expedition, slowly poisoning the unwary seamen? If so, where was the lead coming from? Dr. Beatty's hypothesis about lead poisoning was rapidly taking shape, but the samples were too limited to be conclusive. Beatty felt his findings warranted a return to Beechey Island and a detailed investigation and exhumation of the 2 remaining bodies. The 2 bodies to be exhumed were from Franklin's ship HMS Erebus. Able-bodied seaman John Hartnell hailed from Brompton, Kent. He died on January 4th, 1846. William Brain was a private in the Royal Marines when he died on April 3rd of the same year. There are few places on Earth as inhospitable as Beechy Island. The terrain is basically a pile of gravel, loose limestone shale on the surface with permafrost below. It is this permafrost which acts as a mummifying agent, preserving, at least partially, any organic matter contained within it. As soon as the surface is cleared, Walt Cole and the other team members begin the back-breaking work of pickaxing their way through permafrost to Hartnell's coffin. After a few moments, Jim Savell will take over and dig until he, too, is forced to take a break.
Okay, next turn.
19th century rescue ships reported evidence of an observatory, a carpenter's shop, a forge, a shooting gallery, and a large storehouse. There were also signs that Franklin's ships made a hasty escape from Beechy Island as soon as the pack ice relaxed its grip. The sailors left many useful items behind: gloves, keys, pieces of canvas, fragments of clothes, as well as the inevitable legacy of any large group of travelers, a garbage dump.
Next to the grave site, this has to be the most important part of this particular location. And we think the reason is that the graves and the bodies in the graves and what they're going to tell us connects directly to this site. This is a can dump left here by Franklin. Our theory is, and I think we can confirm it here today, if we look at any of these cans here, we can pick up and see a problem. Here's a beautiful example of a can with inside big lumps of lead tin solder in direct contact with the food. And if you pick up pretty well any piece here, you'll see inside the can a large quantity of solder. And this would have contaminated the food over a period of time while they were stored on the ships, and maybe even when they're reheating of the food in the cans. And I think there's no question here that these cans are an extremely important part of the story.
The expedition carried almost 8,000 lead-soldered cans of preserved meats, soups, vegetables, and other necessities of life. Commander Fitzjames, the Erebus' second-in-command, disapproved of the selection of Goldner Provisioners as the ship's supplier. Goldner had never before provisioned a naval ship and was awarded the contract solely because of the company's low bid.
This is not in good shape.
No.
It is going to come out, though.
It's not attached anywhere.
Yeah. Foot end out?
Yeah. Go.
Wow. Look at the discoloration in there. Careful.
Right down here. Good.
Well, the water flowed back in, didn't it?
Yep.
It's just a
Interesting pattern
stuck.
there with the almost, I don't know if it's layers or sort of fingers of ice there.
right here, yeah.
Well, all of it, it's not just solid.
Okay, that's the
That's his chest. I guess.
shroud, yeah. And if we recall, I don't think his face is very far below that.
Nope. Meltwater next.
Yeah, a lot of ice in there.
In the final hours of melting, the air of expectancy is almost palpable. Everyone is preparing themselves for their first view of John Hartnell's face.
You can see how his face is desiccated and it's mummified. The soft tissues have diminished in volume. The lips have been pulled back.
Already, it's so different than Torrington. It's just a completely different story here.
This is a particularly solemn moment for Brian Spenceley. He alone is meeting an ancestor. gazing at his own family history over a distance of 140 years. The Erebus crew took great care in creating John Hartnell's resting place. The coffin was made to fit his shrouded body, and a pillow filled with wood shavings was tucked under his head. The dead man, weighing under 100 pounds, was lying on a blanket and buried in 3 shirts and a wool watch cap. The epitaph chiseled into Hartnell's headboard reads, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." This stern religious warning seems an odd contrast to the gentle manner in which the body was prepared.
Oh, the skull was 7 tenths, yeah. Double it.
Over 100. Try 1.5 at 100. You're in effect.
Notman and Anderson decide to do their first x-rays while the upper body is still clothed. The heavy post-mortem discoloration suggests that there had been some delay in John Hartnell's burial.
So all the stuff here is just clothes.
Some of the initial x-rays are showing peculiar images. What is depicted in the body cavity does not comply with anatomical fact. The major surprise comes when Hartnell's clothes are finally removed.
Son of a bitch. He has been.
Oh, he has.
He's been autopsied. He's been autopsied. Oh!
Y incision.
But an upside down Y.
Yeah.
This sort of thing has never been seen before. This is absolutely unique. Okay, let me just lift him. Can I just get where you are?
Yeah, let
Hartnell's body had undergone an autopsy while it was still aboard the HMS Erebus in 1846. Once the autopsy was done, the ship's doctors simply filled the body cavity with loose organs. This explains why Dr. Notman's original x-rays were confusing, and also why the odor of decomposition was so much stronger than expected.
Here, Donna.
Now, if you can just stick his arm down and...
Mr. Donald Bray of Surrey, England, is a direct descendant of John Hartnell. One of Mr. Bray's most precious possessions is a letter written by Sarah Hartnell to her sons John and Thomas, both able seamen on the Franklin expedition. Because she was ill, Sarah was concerned that she would not live to see her sons return. The letter was written almost a year after John's death.
Due to her heart condition and the anticipated length of the expeditions being away, she conceived it as unlikely she would ever meet them again. And she expresses herself on that subject quite poignantly. My dear children, I have great pleasure to have a chance to write to you. I hope you are both well. I assure you I have many anxious hours
about you, but endeavor to cast my cares on him, who is too wise to err, and too good to be unkind. If it is the Lord's will, may we be spared to meet on earth. If not, God grant that we may all meet around his throne to praise him to all eternity, are the prayers of your affectionate mother, Sarah Hartnell.
Soon after the final clearing of William Brain's coffin, the research team makes a major discovery. An embossed copper plaque in the shape of a shield is attached to the lid. The inscription on the plaque confirms that William Brain was a Royal Marine of the 8th Company, Western Division, on the ship HMS Erebus, died April 3rd, 1846, aged 33 years.
The upper part of Brain's grave showing the plaque.
It takes 8 hours of melting to expose the body of William Brain. The face is covered with a red kerchief made of cotton, possibly one of Brain's prized possessions.
Be careful here. This is pretty delicate. There's a beard. curly, dark.
Trimmed on the chin.
Look at that bad tooth
Just
there.
let me check if it's frozen here. Oh, looks alright.
There's an exposed pulp cavity in that tooth. Okay. Okay, here we go. It's loose down here. This is here. You got that?
Okay, it's frozen right here, so be
Okay, that's as
careful.
far as I can go. Oh, it looks like he's balding a bit. Look at that. Isn't that something? Look at the scar there.
Amazing how well preserved the upper part is.
Well, let's see if we can get an idea of the clothing here. It's not done up.
Is there any more?
Part else. And there's a sweater. There, U-shaped, and just like with Hartnell, so there's 3 pieces of clothing in the upper
Very
body.
similar. It's a little bit of freezing right here. Just a touch. Okay.
Oh, look at that hand. That is really well preserved. Okay, now where's his left arm? There, underneath him.
I think so.
Isn't that strange, though? There must have been enough room for him. So they had to tuck his arm underneath,
Perhaps.
possibly. No pants.
William Brain was a big man for his time, just under 6 feet tall, and his arm was twisted beneath him as though the sailors had trouble fitting him into his coffin. At death, Brain was extremely emaciated, weighing less than 90 pounds. The face is very discolored, suggesting that the body was kept on shipboard several days before burial.
You want to have him roll back a little bit now? I want to make sure we get the lateral knee on there.
Dr. Notman is anxious to complete his x-rays as quickly as possible.
At least his limbs are flexible. It's going to help a great deal. He seems fairly stable, too.
Well,
Just let go.
all I need is something underneath this part. Here.
As he proceeds, the x-rays are clear and easily understandable, primarily because the body is much freer of internal ice and was not autopsied after death. Damage to one side of the body arouses suspicions that it may have been gnawed by rats, not surprising at a time when rats on sailing ships were almost as prevalent as sailors.
Okay. Exposing. On the picture over here on the left is a shot of the left knee. Over here, these 2 skull x-rays really show a big difference between Hartnell on the right and Brain on the left. We had a great deal of difficulty with Hartnell's skull initially because we could not penetrate the amount of ice that was inside. It's just one dense solid block of ice. With Brain, on the other hand, we could penetrate the skull and show the bony details almost immediately. This is an excellent technical picture. We'll be able to analyze that in greater detail under appropriate lighting conditions.
Once the coffin has been covered, the research team begins the process of returning the gravesite to its original condition.
The arrows.
When the stones and gravel have been relocated, there will be little sign of modern interference. Over the course of the clinical analysis of the tissue samples, scientists determined that both men suffered from severe tuberculosis and that the probable cause of death was pneumonia. The preliminary lead analysis conducted by Walt Cole was much as expected. The levels of lead found in the bone of John Hartnell, as well as that of William Brain, were consistent with Beattie's findings in the case of Petty Officer John Torrington, levels 3 to 4 times higher than in normal, modern human bone. Hair samples indicated lead levels ranging from 20 to 90 times the current scientific standard.
What is remarkable about this historical event is that you can apply the same forensic techniques to looking at unanswered historical problems as we do in looking at the modern forensic problems, in supplementing the work of historians and archaeologists with physical evidence that can support or suggest re-looking at events in the past. Franklin expedition is one of these, where there was a mass disaster. It is a forensic problem in trying to determine the events that led to the disaster. And here's where the factor of lead comes in. That the lead itself has variable effects on the body as well as the mind. Even very subtle effects on the mind could have very important results. We just look at the decision-making process of the officers. We should look seriously at the implications of lead on the decision-making process.
There can be little doubt that the cumulative effects of lead contaminating the food supply contributed to the final tragedy of the Franklin expedition. But was this a singular case? There have been many unexplained deaths, disappearances, even stories of madness on Arctic explorations before and after Franklin's time. The hostile environment and vast distances of the Arctic would account for most of these incidents. But Dr. Beatty's investigation begs the question, could tinned food supplies have been involved in other nautical tragedies? Food supplies meant to sustain life, but carrying instead the seeds of disaster for iron men in wooden ships.
With 100 seamen he sailed away to the frozen ocean in the month of May, to seek that passage around the pole where we poor sailors do sometimes go. In Baffin's Bay where the whalefish blow, the fate of Franklin no man may know. The fate of Franklin no tongue can tell, where Franklin and his sailors dwell.